The Cuban Revolution. But Castro initially just became head of the army, as agreed by the revolutionaries. Manuel Urrutia, Leo a liberal antibatista activist, became the next president, and José Miró Codina, another liberal, became prime minister. Miró, however, quickly resigned, and Castro became prime minister and conducted a tour of many nations in the Americas, including the USA in 1959, however, although he was not necessarily a communist himself. At this point, he began appointing communists, like Che Guevara, into cabinet positions, angering President Urrutia. So the two men fell out, and Castro resigned as prime minister in July 1959, prompting thousands of his supporters to demand to resign. He did, and Castro became prime minister and largely ran the country, while Osvaldo Duarte Costa Rodeo, a communist, became president. Now in power, Castro began to introduce a wide range of schemes like building many schools, houses, and hospitals. But he also nationalized many businesses and seized land from American companies, angering the U.S. government, and also powerful organizations like the Mafia and the United Fruit Company, which had a great deal of political influence in Central America. And Castro also began executing political opponents, banning political parties, and censoring the press. So many joined the ongoing Escambray Rebellion, which was made up of Batista supporters and some of Castro's old allies, who were angered by his undemocratic policies. They conducted sabotage raids from their base and quickly found new allies in America and the Dominican Republic. Then finally, Eisenhower accused Castro of being a communist and ordered the CIA remove him from power. The CIA had had success in overthrowing leaders, like in Guatemala in 1954, but their sabotage, raids, and assassination attempts in Cuba failed, and so too did their embargo on Cuban sugar, which began when Castro nationalized oil companies in Cuba in order to refine Soviet oil, and relations got worse. When a vessel carrying Belgian weapons exploded in Havana's port in March 1960, Castro had been importing weapons to expand his army, and he blamed America for this explosion. And at a UN meeting in New York, Castro met with the Soviet leader Khrushchev and people like Malcolm X. So now, believing that Cuba was ready to become an ally of the Soviet Union, Eisenhower approved a plan of an invasion of the island. But hoping to hide their involvement in this invasion, the Americans recruited men from the large Cuban population in Florida, which had fled from political persecution. Around 1,500 of these men were trained by the CIA throughout 1960, and the Americans acquired planes and ships that could not be traced back to them. They hoped this force, made up entirely of Cubans, would prevent the Soviets from getting involved, and believed it would encourage anti-Castro rebellions. However, in 1960, there was an election in the United States, and both candidates, Kennedy and Nixon, campaigned on being tougher on Cuba and communist nations. Kennedy won this election and quickly approved the invasion plan. In March 1961, former Cuban Prime Minister was made head of the Cuban Revolutionary Committee, while the army was transferred to Nicaragua, ready to launch their invasion in mid-April. Their bombers tried to destroy the Cuban Air Force. But Cuban intelligence had found out about the invasion ahead of time, and these bombings had little effect. So on April 16th, a small force was sent to Bahia Honda as a diversion, while the rest of the army was sent to the Bay of Pigs on the 17th, but they came under immediate fire, and the Cuban Air Force was able to destroy most of the ships carrying medical supplies and ammunition. Plus, the Bay of Pigs proved to be a poor landing site. Initially, the CIA planned to land in Trinidad, which had a better port and was close to the rebels in the Escambray Mountains, where they could escape and join the ongoing rebellion should the invasion fail. The Bay of Pigs was surrounded by swamps and a radio station, which allowed Castro to be alert and mobilize his army 25,000 Cuban soldiers, then descended upon the now poorly equipped invaders and defeated them within a couple of days. Most of the exiles were captured, and the Americans could not, as hoped, hide their involvement in this invasion. So, suffering a major knock to his prestige, Kennedy continued to try assassinate or oust Castro through Operation Mongoose. But this, too, proved to be ineffective. Castro, on the other hand, began to become more dependent on the Soviets for defense, and this would eventually lead to nuclear weapons being placed on the island and the Cuban Missile Crisis.